everybody, welcome back to my channel and thank you for joining me for another Harloween video, even though this video is most likely posting after Halloween and in November. It definitely is, but since it's the conclusion of our series on the alleged demonic possession and multiple exorcisms of 23-year-old Anneleise Michel, we're just going to pretend it's still October for now. We're just going to go with it. And I mean, we got Dale Cooper back there. We got the skeleton head. I might take these down this year. Who knows? So when we last left off, Anneleise and her family were waiting for permission from Bishop Stengel, who's the Bishop of Würzburg, to have a solemn or major exorcism performed. And admittedly, things with Anneleise were bad, right? She was eating insects, flies, and spiders, allegedly. She was performing hundreds of genuflections, dropping to her knees, jumping back up over and over again, even though she was clearly in pain and injured. And as far as anyone knew, she was now being possessed and controlled by the demon Judas, the betrayer of Jesus Christ, and apparently a guy who was known to be big on possessing people, according to Father Rodwick, the demon and exorcism expert. Father Alt, another priest who was really involved with Anneleise, he wasn't close enough geographically to be present at multiple exorcisms a week, so he brought in Father Renz, who was basically brushing up on his exorcism knowledge while he waited for the bishop to give the green light to have Annelise's demons exorcised. And I do remember something I read from an article on this around that time that said Father Renz was like an exorcism expert, that he was, really good at them because he'd done a bunch. As far as I know, he had not. This was his first one. Now, that may be conflicting information, and who knows what the truth is, but I definitely don't think that Father Renz was this huge, Dr. Shepard McDreamy of the exorcism world. He could perform brain surgery in his sleep. Father Renz could perform exorcisms in his sleep because he was really studying and brushing up on the art of the exorcism while he was waiting for this permission to come in. And he did seem very nervous before the exorcisms, and almost as if he really didn't know what to expect, and he didn't know what was going to happen. So that brings us to September 24th, 1975, the day of the first major exorcism. And you'll see that Father Renz is really nervous going into this. And he's like, what's going to happen? And then after the first one, he's like, what did this do? I don't know what to expect. How many more of these are we going to have to do? I'm really disappointed that this one exorcism didn't just take care of the problem. But before we dive into all of this again, because it's going to get wild, let's have a word from the sponsor of today's video, HelloFresh. You can skip the grocery store lines and stressful meal planning and get mouth-watering seasonal recipes and fresh pre-measured ingredients delivered right to your door with HelloFresh. I truly do love HelloFresh. It makes cooking at home fun, easy, and affordable, and that's why they are America's #1 meal kit. And I love cooking, I really do. I come from a long line of people who love cooking, both men and women. So it's something I really do enjoy, but I enjoy it to be this leisurely thing where it doesn't have to be stressful. And you can't really have that when you got kids going to school and everybody else going to work, and you don't have a lot of time to just, spend all day prepping and cooking. And I do always have this misleading feeling that once summer is over, everything will get slower as the weather outside gets cooler, and then suddenly I'll have more free time, but that never happens. In fact, after Halloween and before Christmas, my life is absolute chaos. And I'm sure many of you are in the same position because you've got holidays, people coming into town, you're starting Christmas shopping, you're planning for, seasonal stuff. Oh, it's crazy. But HelloFresh makes this busy time of year easier than ever with chef-crafted recipes that are easy to prepare and delicious. Cozy up with some seasonal favorites like cowboy turkey. I love freaking turkey, man. When prepared correctly, turkey's amazing. Anybody who says they don't like turkey, it's because whoever's been cooking your turkey doesn't know how to do it and it's been dry. But if you make turkey right, nothing's better. They also have this amazing black bean chili. Oh, and one of my favorites, mushroom ravioli with kale and walnuts. And they have a green pepper chowder that I did not think I was going to like, but I did. And these may sound like they would be difficult to cook if you aren't like an experienced chef, but HelloFresh makes it so easy because not only do they give you every ingredient that you need to prepare the meals, all pre-portioned and fresh, but they give you recipe cards. See, like this one shows you what the final product is supposed to look like, which is helpful, and on the back, step-by-step instructions that make cooking these meals really impossible to mess up. In fact, my husband and I were like messing around with each other because he always likes to skip ahead and start doing things. And I'm like, no, you have to go step by step because that's how it goes in my head. But he's like jumping all over the place. Not even a little bit?
Not even a little bit.
You're telling me it's not a little bit boiling?
Not even.
It's definitely a little bit boiling.
Like thinking about like wanting to
No,
boil.
it's actually boiling, man.
Yeah, I bet you that's 30 degrees under boiling.
What are you talking about? You put your hand in there if it's not boiling.
Hold on.
Put your hand right in there, man. Oh, okay. What is this? Yeah, if you stir it, it's going to stop boiling. That's just science. But either way, if you follow it step by step or if you jump around a little bit, it's still impossible to mess up. And not only will cooking with HelloFresh save you time because you don't have to worry about figuring out what you're going to make for dinner and then go to the store and shop for the ingredients, but it saves you money, which is much needed during this time of year. So you have a little extra money for Christmas presents or for yourself, maybe a massage or something, a Christmas massage. HelloFresh is cheaper than grocery store shopping. I think the ingredients are far more fresh than what you get in the grocery store because all that stuff's been waiting for you to go and pick it up. But with HelloFresh, there's no like middleman. It's just going to you. There's also way less food waste with HelloFresh because you're not buying entire things of like cream or sour cream or bags of cheese to use to make one recipe and then the rest of it just gets thrown out or goes bad. And using HelloFresh is 25% cheaper than takeout. This week, we really enjoyed this shrimp spaghetti with a kick. It was a beautiful bouquet of fresh zucchini, tender shrimp, and a savory garlic herb butter sauce. We did leave out the chili pepper because although I like it hot, I love spicy food, we wanted the kids to eat it, which they did. And as you can see in this video, Aiden, my son, he actually went back for seconds and he was stealing all the shrimp. We were all yelling at him because he kept taking too much shrimp than what he was supposed to be getting. HelloFresh does have a line of kid-friendly recipes that are perfect for picky eaters, but we have found that the kids have liked almost everything we've prepared from HelloFresh. We don't want them to be picky eaters. So because all the meals taste good, it's actually expanded their taste buds and opened up their horizons as far as what they'll eat and what they won't. And HelloFresh has been a staple in our house for years, whether my husband and I are cooking together, which we always have a good time doing, or we're including the kids in on the fun. It's always a great time at the end of the day, especially after everyone's been at school and work and we can all unwind, talk, laugh, and share an amazing meal together that was easy and quick to make. I definitely think that anyone who tries HelloFresh will love it, and right now is a great time to check it out for yourself. All you have to do is click the link in the description box and use code stephanieharlowe70 for 70% off and free shipping. Once again, click the link in the description box or go to hellofresh.com and use code stephanieharlowe70 for 70% off and free shipping. There's an E on the end of Stephanie and Harlow, just so you don't know, and you should see it up on the screen. And if you've used HelloFresh already, let me know what some of your favorite meals have been, or if you've tried this shrimp spaghetti with a kick, let me know if you liked it as much as we did, because I think it's definitely in our top 3 at this point. Aiden, I know, has requested that we make it every day. Thank you so much to HelloFresh for sponsoring today's video. Truly, guys, check them out. I love it. I think you will too. But let's dive in. So Annelise's first exorcism was apparently an event not to be missed, and everyone was there. Annelise's parents, Anna and Joseph, of course, as well as her boyfriend Peter and 2 of her sisters, Barbara and Roswitha. In attendance also were the priest Rat Pack, Father Alt, Father Roth, and Father Herman, as well as the presiding priest, Father Renz, and of course, Thea Hine made sure she got a front row seat. She even invited her husband, also named Peter. So everybody's basically like coming to witness this, and for the event, an upstairs bedroom at the back of the house was chosen in case Anneleise was loud or screaming. This loud screaming wouldn't be heard out on the street at the front of the house, so they stuck her in a room in the back of the house. And in the bedroom, they set up a table, basically a shrine, with pictures and statues of Mary and Jesus, and of course, Father Pio, Padre Pio, and then in the next bedroom over, they set up another table with coffee and pastries in case anyone was feeling peckish. And as much as I really wanted to judge them for this, I can't really judge them for this. I don't know about German people, but us Italians have coffee and pastries at every single event, no matter what it is or how awkward it is to have food there, because we really think that food fixes everything. And so does a strong, hot cup of coffee. And I mean, it kind of does. And these exorcisms were going on all day, all night, sometimes for 5, 6, 7 hours. So, I mean, yeah, you're going to need coffee and pastries. So before the ritual started, Anneleise was reportedly behaving normally, talking with the gathered crowd and with Father Renz. She was even smiling and laughing a little bit. She was talking about how she was nervous. She didn't know what to expect. So she did ask Father Alt to hold her hands because, he had been sort of a spiritual guide for her in the months before. And she had just met Father Renz a couple of days prior, but she would also come to be very close and trusting in Father Renz. So in this first exorcism, as soon as Father Renz sprinkled holy water on her body, Anneleise began shaking violently, and when he made the sign of the cross over her, she screamed, and she raged, and she fought, trying to attack the priest. Thea's husband, Peter, and Annelise's father, Joseph, had to hold her down so that she wouldn't hurt herself or anyone else, and still she fought against them, attempting to bite the arms of the men holding her and kicking her legs at Father Renz. In his notes, Father Renz wrote, quote, "Occasionally she screams, especially if she's sprinkled with holy water. At times, she howls like a dog. Repeatedly, she says, 'Stop with that shit,' or 'You shit guy, you dirty sow, put that shit away,'" end quote. And she's speaking of the holy water when she says, "put it away." Now, Anneleise doesn't strike me as the kind of girl who would use bad language or foul language in her day-to-day life. She wasn't like me, I should say. But Anneleise, definitely not that kind of person, right? So why was she using this kind of language now? Obviously, if you are going the demonic possession route, you would say she wasn't using this kind of language. This was the demon inside of her speaking, Judas, if you will. So here's my first interruption into my own story, because there is something that I thought of when I was reading this, the meowing nuns of France. And some of Annelise's behavior reminded me of these women. So in 1844, German physician Justus Friedrich Karl Hecker wrote an account detailing a contagious bout of meowing amongst nuns at a convent in France. He said, quote, "I have read in a good medical work that a nun in a very large convent in France began to meow like a cat. Shortly afterwards, other nuns also meowed. At last, all the nuns meowed together every day at a certain time for several hours. The whole surrounding Christian neighborhood heard, with equal chagrin and astonishment, this daily cat concert." End quote. It's not funny because I think the reason that they were doing this is very sad, but also it is funny if you think about it, right? If you allow yourself and your brain to picture the ridiculousness of this event, these nuns all meowing together every night and the neighborhoods around being like, "Oh my God, these meowing nuns are at it again. This is ludicrous." It's just hilarious. The meowing nuns, who also were known to bite people, are often spoken about along with the dancing plague, which I've done a video on, linked below if you haven't seen it, but they're both considered to be cases of mass psychosis or mass delusions, which I suppose they are, but there has to be a reason behind it, right? A reason that not just one nun, but multiple nuns would begin doing something so out of character and honestly abnormal for anyone. Even today, if a bunch of people started meowing like cats, we would raise an eyebrow. We'd be like, "What the hell is going on?" And then we would probably just give them a litter box to use. And I definitely feel like now, in 2022, it would almost be considered offensive to tell a person who believed they were a cat that they weren't a cat, right? It would be like, you can't say that they are whatever they think they are. If they think they're a cat, how is that hurting you? And it's certainly not, right? Like these people who get plastic surgery to make them look like tigers and stuff, like that's not hurting me. It's just hurting them. But then you would also make the argument that Anneleise, believing she was possessed and everybody like going along with it, it wasn't really hurting anybody else, but it was hurting her. But people considered that to still be wrong. So it's kind of the same thing, right? So what is overall the theory of why these nuns behaved in this way? Basically, it's believed that these women lived under very strict moral guidelines. They were expected to take vows of poverty and chastity. They were expected to work very hard from morning until night, pray all the time, basically live these very straight and narrow lives where there wasn't any excitement and there wasn't any like wiggle room to just be yourself, be spontaneous, go outside the box. And many of these women at this time, they hadn't chosen this life of being a nun. They had been sent to convents by family members. So these women were very repressed, so crushed under the weight of expectation and obligation that they wanted to lash out, basically. I mean, they just wanted to like let loose, there was all pent up inside and it came out, and this is the way it came out. Now, I don't go to church often, but whenever I do, I sounded like the Dos Equis man. I don't go to church often, but whenever I do for like a funeral or a wedding and everyone's sitting there all quiet and solemn and serious, I always think in my head quietly, like, what would happen if I just stood up and started screaming? What would happen if I just started running around screaming? There is like this very strong compulsion in me to do that. I feel suffocated almost by how serious and sacred and solemn everything is. I feel like I want to get out. That could just be my personality. Anytime things get too serious, I feel weird. Let me know if you guys have felt this way sometimes too. I used to feel that way in college as well, when everyone was really quiet in classes and like taking a test. And I'd be like, what would happen if I just stood on my desk right now and started screaming? I don't know, but I can't imagine how these nuns felt. Or, maybe how Anneleise felt, because she also was under strict moral guidelines since she was born, basically. For her entire life, her mother and father were very overprotective. She was a sick child all the time. She needed to be handled with care. And when she began to grow up, her mother didn't want her, kind of going to dances with other kids her age because there were boys there and boys were trouble. Boys would get you in trouble, as a boy had done to Anna herself, getting her pregnant out of wedlock. Anneleise didn't have it as bad as the nuns. We can safely say that. And when she went away to college, she had a boyfriend, and her mom didn't try to prevent her from having a boyfriend. But even then, she did seem weird about sex. Like it was something she didn't even want to approach, or she didn't know how to approach. She didn't know how to feel about it. So she kind of made this excuse like, oh, because of what's happening to me, because of this possession or this dark force on me, which is making me feel nothing, I don't even have the desire to be, sexually active. But maybe it was just because she was like, I don't know, I'm feeling as a young woman and my hormones raging like this is something I want to do, but everything I've ever learned my whole life is telling me it's bad and it's something you shouldn't really do at this young age. So because I'm conflicted, because I don't know how to feel, I'm just going to make an excuse of why I can't do it. So basically, the urge to be intimate with her boyfriend Peter, which would be a very natural urge for a woman her age, it was like battling against the guilt that had been instilled in her from a young age. And I have said a million times, I don't judge religion or people who are religious, but I will say that some people I've met who are religious do have weird relationships with sex. Unhealthy relationships with sex, if you will. Not all, obviously, just some. So a lot of these symptoms could simply be Anneleise acting out, doing things that she would never be allowed to do under any other circumstances, but because she was possessed, like what was anyone going to say? It wasn't her fault. She wasn't swearing or being violent. It was the demon. She was just a victim. No one could be mad at her. That's a theory for the Salem witch trials as well, that these afflicted Puritan girls were just going ham for the first time in their lives, and they had to blame somebody because they didn't want to get in trouble. They didn't want to be seen as like unclean or unholy. So it was easy to blame a witch for their outlandish behavior, when in reality, it probably just felt good to let loose, and they had to come up with a reason of why they were acting that way. I also have a video that touches on the Salem witch trials, and we talk about Giles Corey and the sheriff's curse from last Halloween. So if you haven't seen that, I will link it as well. So the first exorcism session went on for 5.5 hours, and at the end of it, Anneleise spoke to Father Renz, and she told him a few things. She said she'd been present the whole time inside that dark hole where she was like thrown in whenever the demons took control. So she was able to witness everything that happened, but not be able to stop it. She also told Father Renz that she felt progress had been made during this exorcism, but she was disappointed that he hadn't continued the exorcism longer. Now, before this first exorcism, Father Renz had been nervous, but afterwards he was disappointed because no demons had come out to play, right? Judas hadn't spoken to him. No one had been expelled from Anneleise. And you can tell that this weighed heavily on him because Father Renz wrote, quote, "One needs to grapple with the feeling of uselessness and failure," end quote. And this really is a sign to me that he genuinely was trying to help Anneleise. If he was just doing it for clout or because it was fun for him or because he was like some suspicious person who saw demons everywhere, I think he would be like, yeah, well, that exorcism didn't work. Too bad. We got to do a bunch more. But he seemed really disappointed that this one exorcism hadn't done the trick for her. So he seems genuinely to care that she's suffering and that she has to continue suffering because she told him herself she felt better, but it hadn't been enough. 4 days later, on September 28th, they tried again, but this time Thea Hine had the bright idea of bringing along a tape recorder because she's the worst. Annelise's father, Joseph, he was like, oh, that's a great idea. He also ran downstairs, grabbed his tape recorder, and Father Renz was like, you guys are brilliant. Hold my holy water. I've got to go get my tape recorder. In reality, he just wanted to record the sessions because performing the exorcism, he had his hands full with that, literally, so he'd been unable to make as many notes as he wanted during this first session, and over the next 10 months, Father Renz would record and compile a library of 40 audio tapes. I'm going to play you a small clip from these tapes, and just understand it's probably disturbing. You are hearing Anneleise Michel in the middle of an exorcism. You won't be able to understand what she's saying because she speaks German, unless you're a German speaker, of course, and then you will be able to understand. But it's disturbing. It's very disturbing. And a lot of people say they didn't believe that she was actually, under demonic possession until they heard these tapes. And I'm only going to play you a little bit. I'm not going to keep bringing these clips back and playing them for you because personally for me, they were upsetting, they were unnerving, and I felt my nerves rattled every time I listened. So just a quick clip so you understand what we're dealing with.
Warum? Nein, ich sag's nicht. Guck mal diese Rede. Weil eine starke.
And keep in mind, during all of this, until the very end, Anneleise continued to go to school. She continued to attend classes. She continued to take exams and pass exams. She continued to work on her senior thesis and also make arrangements for a student teaching position. Now, I can't go over every single exorcism and what happened. There is a record of that if you're interested in it. It's a lot, but I can give you an overview of what Anneleise did and said during these sessions and how they progressed. Now, I find it interesting that after the first exorcism session, Father Renz had made it clear in his notes, as well as to Anneleise and her family, that he was disappointed after the first exorcism because the demon or demons inside of Anneleise had not come out during the exorcism. They hadn't come out and made themselves known. So I find it interesting that he would have made his disappointment clear, and then after that first session, all of a sudden, the demons did make their presence known, and then some. It's almost like they heard Father Renz say he was disappointed, and then they were like, oh, well, we don't want to disappoint the priest. We should come out next time. We didn't know we had to come out during these exorcisms. We just thought, we had to chill inside and keep control of her. But if we've got to come out, we're going to come out. Initially, it was just one demon, Judas. But eventually, another demon would break in, and then another, and then 2 demons would argue about who got to stay inside of Anneleise before the demons just shook hands and said, hey, let's torture her together. The first 3 demons to introduce themselves were Judas, who ended up being the one who talked the most and seemed to be the spokesperson of the demon coalition. He was followed by Lucifer and Nero. The next 3 demons to begin talking were Cain, Hitler, and someone named Pastor Fleshman. I'm going to give you some more information about Pastor Fleshman in a minute. So all 6 of these demons, they all constantly yelled out the words, damned for eternity, and they spoke to each other and they spoke to the gathered audience, not just to the priests, but before long, the people watching were jumping in and talking to the demons and asking questions, which is incredibly bizarre to me. Like, is that how an exorcism goes? But I guess if you were religious and you legitimately thought that these were real demons inside of Anneleise, and you could ask them anything, right? You could ask them about all the things you've wondered about, like heaven and hell and the afterlife and God and Jesus. You might be shooting out some questions too. I would. I mean, I'm curious about all that stuff. And if I was like suspicious that they were demons, and then after a while I was like, okay, I 100,000,000% now believe these are real demons. Oh yeah, I'd be grilling them hard. For instance, one time, Annelise's sister Roswitha started talking to Judas, and she accused Judas of making Anneleise break the crucifix. Remember when she slammed it against her bed? And Judas growled at Roswitha, quote, it was that damn dog Lucifer, end quote. Judas also talked some shit about the other demons, especially Hitler, who he claimed had a big mouth, but not much to say. The demons claimed that they were given entry to Anneleise because a jealous woman who had lived next door to Anna in Leibelfing had cursed Anneleise before she was even born. And Anna claimed she knew who the demons were referring to, a woman who had been a refugee from the war and who had been resentful when Anna married Joseph and they began to do well. But when Anna and Joseph tried to find the woman to question her, they discovered she had since passed away. The demons told Father Renz, go on, babble all day, I'm not leaving, and you, with your shit words, save your trouble. Not even a sow believes you. Or they'd say things like, no, she belongs to me, get out of here, you carcass. And, of course, Anneleise is saying all of this stuff, but this is not in her own voice. It's in like a deep guttural voice, kind of like what you heard on the tape recorder, and like just growling and gravelly and, scary, like demonic. Now, a lot of records and a lot of reports of this case of possession say that when Anneleise was talking as Hitler, she spoke in his dialect, because he wasn't from Germany. He wasn't born in Germany. Adolf Hitler was born in Austria, so I guess when he spoke German, he spoke it with like an Austrian accent or like a different dialect. And some reports say when she spoke like Hitler, she spoke in his dialect and his accent. That is absolutely not true. We're going to talk a little bit about the languages in a second. But the demons also talked a lot about God. And they talked about how people no longer believed in God or the sacred texts or the burning torture of hell. During one exorcism, the demons made this statement, quote, today, no one believes any longer in the Immaculate Conception. The Church, at present, most believe it is only a community. The modernists are killing it ever more. We are hard at work at this, so it may be drawn, and we throw much poison onto the Church, so it will be drawn. By now, those who believe in the Church and are faithful and believe in her are very few. Many believe that after life, everything is finished. They are very many, and they live accordingly because they do not pray any longer. Sins reach heaven, but the thing will not last long. End quote. Let's put a pin in that because I'm going to elaborate on this. It's very important in my opinion, but I want to talk to you about one of Annelise's demons and where it's believed this demon, Pastor Fleshman, came from. Because if you don't believe she was genuinely possessed, you'd have to believe that she was making all of this up. Even if she had a mental illness or some sort of, medical illness, all of these things she's saying are still coming from her own head and her own imagination. She's pretending to be these entities. So how did she know about Pastor Pastor Fleshman, a fallen priest from the Edelben parish. Well, I mean, as we've talked about previously, it just so happened that the Edelben parish was the parish that Father Alt had recently become the pastor of. And Father Alt himself had told Anneleise about this man, Pastor Fleshman, in the fall of 1975, because when he'd first come to the Edelben parish, he'd found it to be kind of a mess, very disorganized, so he'd been going through the parish records trying to get everything in line, and he'd read about Pastor Fleshman, and Father Alt was horrified by the stories he read. Fleshman was allegedly a womanizer, a drunk, a terrible father, a terrible husband, and reportedly he had beat a man to death in the parish house once, and he had beat a woman within almost an inch of her life. So Father Alt read about this guy, and then he goes to visit Anneleise, or Anneleise visits him while she's still in school, and she's like, oh, how are things going with, your new parish? And he's like, well, good, but listen to this story I heard about this dude who's a bad guy. Now, Father Alt would later claim that, yes, he did tell Anneleise about Pastor Fleshman, but Anneleise had told him details about Fleshman that he had not told her, some that he hadn't even known himself, and he claimed that he could prove this. He could prove that she hadn't been able to read up on Pastor Fleshman in the Chronicle because at that time it was in Würzburg with the archivist. So basically there's only one document or a series of documents that talks about this Father or Pastor Fleshman, and Father Alt claims that she wouldn't have been able to read that stuff because it was in Würzburg with the archivist. Father Alt also claimed that even before he himself had learned about Pastor Fleshman, he'd felt uneasy in the Edelben parish house, and he'd had trouble sleeping because when he was in bed, he would feel his skin crawling, and he sometimes felt he was being yanked back and forth by two different beings. But once again, this is the guy who claimed that as soon as he touched Annelise's letters, he was able to divine all this information about her, and then he was being haunted by these dark beings, and he was smelling terrible smells in his apartment. So Father Alt claims also that when he was downstairs in the parish house, he would always hear footsteps and doors opening and closing upstairs, and his housekeeper and her young daughter heard these noises as well, and the young child refused to even go upstairs. Later, Father Alt had spoken to some locals, and he found out that the parish house was widely believed to be haunted by a tall man wearing a black coat who was allegedly this Pastor Fleshman. And Anneleise would later claim in her diary and during her exorcisms that Pastor Fleshman was the Black One, a man dressed all in black who would torment her with his fist. During the exorcisms, you can hear the gathered people becoming more and more invested and involved in what was happening to Anneleise, and they would get this running commentary going at times. They would talk about oh, how horrible the room smells. It smells like burning fecal matter again. But then as the exorcism continued, they would say that the terrible burnt smell was going away, and the smell was replaced by a pleasant smell that no one could quite agree on. Some people said that the good smell smelled like roses. Others said violets, while others thought it was the smell of incest. And the watching audience themselves would begin to feel the effects of the evil forces inside Anneleise. Which, I mean, if I'm a demon and I'm possessing somebody, you talking throughout the movie is going to be really obnoxious to me as well. And maybe Anneleise herself, or whatever was inside of her, didn't like the constant chit-chat. So those who were physically closest to Anneleise when she was being exorcised, they claimed they suddenly felt a weight pulling them back, forcing their bodies to go straight and stiff. Anneleise's boyfriend Peter and Thea Hines' husband Peter were restraining Anneleise during one session when they suddenly felt their arms turn into heavy weights and they could no longer lift them. So Thea Hines stepped in to take over, but she claimed that she reached out with a hand to touch Anneleise, and that hand became completely numb. And when she realized she couldn't feel it anymore, she panicked, and she began running around the room screaming and asking for help, and she had to be blessed, and then finally it went away. Freaking Thea Hine, man. She just cannot stand not being the main character, okay? Everybody's paying attention to Anneleise, who's possessed, and Thea Hines over here me too, I'm possessed, my hand. What was everybody who's claiming to feel this weight or to feel, somebody pulling them back? Was it an attention thing? Were they trying to solidify the belief in this demonic possession with themselves or with others in the room? What was it? That's a question that I've had throughout this series and honestly continue to have. Why did all of these other people claim to feel these things, hear these things, smell these things? Were they all under the same delusion? Were they lying? Why would they lie? I don't know. But once again, it brings me back to the meowing nuns and to the girls in Salem. It was just like this thing where they were like, I'm the weird one if I'm not seeing what everyone else is seeing. I'm the weird one if I'm not going along with this. Maybe they're going to wonder why I'm not being affected when everybody else is, so I'm just going to go with the flow. And we see this a lot in societies, in cultures. Sometimes things are happening in a culture or, in a country or in the world that a lot of people are like, I don't understand this and I don't understand why everybody's going along with it, but everybody has to be going along with it for a good reason because I know these people and they're normal and logical and sane and good people. So if everyone else is on board with this, I'm the weird one if I'm not, and I'm not going to be accepted. And people are going to look at me as an outsider. People are going to look at me as somebody who's not on board with the agenda. And that's a big fear for people, especially within a society and within a culture and a community. Not being accepted, being viewed as somebody outside the limits of what's culturally agreed upon is a scary thing. So Father Renz also claimed that he had brought in to the exorcism room several small bottles of water. And some of these bottles contained holy water from San Damiano, others contained holy water from other sacred sources, and some contained tap water. But allegedly, Anneleise only screamed when she was sprinkled with the holy water, and she did not react when sprinkled with the tap water. So this is supposed to be like a test against basically the placebo effect. She doesn't know which one's holy water. Only the demons inside of her would know. So if she doesn't react when we sprinkle her with the tap water, and she does react when we sprinkle her with the holy water, and she doesn't know which is which, this is a true sign of demonic possession. Now, if this is reported exactly as it went down, I would have a hard time explaining that away as well, if people aren't exaggerating or lying outright. Reportedly, the demons inside of Anneleise understood German and they spoke it fluently, but they also spoke other languages fluently, like Latin, which was apparently the language they preferred to communicate. Now, this is a sign of demonic possession, right? Speaking in tongues, but let us not forget that Anneleise was a master of Latin. Her mother said so herself. Remember, Anneleise picked up Latin quickly. She was amazing at it, even though her father was not good at it. Out of curiosity, Father Renz asked the demons some questions in Chinese because he had previously lived in China for several years, so he spoke the language. And he was assuming that, these demon guys, they'd been around for centuries. They probably knew every language on Earth. And the demons inside of Anneleise, they seemed to understand the questions that were posed to them in Chinese, but when they responded, it was in German. So how can we explain this? Because yes, Anneleise definitely would have been able to communicate in Latin, but Chinese, not so much. Probably not. I mean, there's a very, very, very little chance that she had ever even heard the language spoken. So how was she able to understand what questions were being asked of her and respond to them? Either she was demonically possessed and those demons knew Chinese, or she was just able to guess based on the questions that had already been asked of her in languages she understood. Or maybe she gave answers to these questions that were very vague answers, or maybe the people who were getting the answers, like Father Renz, kind of made the answers fit for the questions that he was asked, just as a form of confirmation bias. Who knows? So these exorcism sessions began in late September, and by early October, it looked as if the demons were getting tired, right? I mean, Anneleise definitely was, because the demons weren't really talking that much, and the priests were allowed to pray for extended periods of time without being interrupted by the demons, like swearing and cursing and stuff. Now, in my opinion, probably just Anneleise was tired. If she wasn't possessed, she's just exhausted, right? Maybe she's run out of things for these demons to say, and maybe she just feels like she's repeating herself at this point, so she's got to come up with new material. During the October 6th exorcism, the demons inside of Anneleise didn't do anything or say anything throughout the whole exorcism, except for at the very end, basically just to show that they were still there and still hanging on. Now, at this point, Father Renz believed that he sensed a vulnerability. He thought that they weren't talking because they were tired, and he decided to up the ante. Instead of waiting a day and coming back to do another exorcism on October 8th, he performed another exorcism the very next day on October 7th, hoping that the lack of energy on behalf of the demons meant that they were weak and vulnerable and ripe for the expelling. But on the evening of October 7th, Annelise's demons were back in full force, screaming again that they were not going anywhere. Reportedly, the people who were present for this session claimed that it sounded as if Anneleise was talking with two voices at once. One voice let out a hoarse scream, while the other laughed maniacally, which isn't impossible for you to talk with two voices at once. I watched this beatboxer who can do it. It's freaking bizarre. And it took me a long time and many videos to believe that he was actually doing this and it wasn't some like parlor trick. But in order to accomplish this, you have to have years and years of vocal training. So either Anneleise was a professional beatboxer behind the scenes and no one knew about it, or they didn't hear what they thought they heard, or I guess, she was actually possessed and two demons were talking at once. Now, Father Rodwick, the exorcism expert, the older priest who was like pushing 80, he was actually present for this session. And Father Habiger, who had picked Father Rodwick up from the train station and brought him to the Michel home so he could watch this exorcism, he was like really stressed out, Father Habiger, because he hadn't been present for all of the exorcisms. And he was like stunned to see how much energy Anneleise was exerting during these sessions, how she was such a tiny girl and she was being held back by multiple people and she was still fighting to the point where it seemed like the people holding her back were being overpowered by her. So Father Habiger was worried about Anneleise and he said to Father Rodwick, the exorcism expert, what are we going to do? I don't think Anneleise can take this anymore. What if these demons kill her? Father Rodwick responded that this was unlikely. There was no record of anyone dying during an exorcism, and demons were allowed to torment a person, but they could not kill them because demons play by the rules. That's absolutely what they're known for doing. They definitely just follow all the rules, and they're very self-aware and considerate of others. But Father Rodwick, he did address the demons during this session, and he was like, you need to leave this girl alone because she can't stand it anymore, physically or spiritually. And reportedly, Judas answered, saying, quote, she must bear it a little longer still because she is cursed and because he is near her, or else she would already have hung herself, end quote. Now, allegedly, Judas was referring to a guardian angel being near Anneleise. And as time went on, these positive forces around Anneleise would increase and gather until the Blessed Virgin Mary herself was in Annelise's corner and talking to her, giving her instructions and giving her support and feedback. Don't worry, we're going to talk about this more in a second. So Anneleise herself would sometimes emerge during these sessions and she would talk about how she was feeling and what she was experiencing. She said that her appetite was not good and that her demons were not allowing her to eat. She said that at night she was sleeping on a blanket on the floor because they were tormenting her. They were pulling her from her bed over and over again. She also talked about her studies and her schoolwork and how she was concerned because her mental acuity was at an all-time low. Anneleise said sometimes she could trick the demons and she could read information really fast and remember it. But other times she would sit in front of the same page of paper and read it over and over again, retaining nothing. Now, during the exorcisms, her demons gleefully took responsibility for this, saying, quote, during her examination of German language, we have blown in her ears for hours, telling her she was damned. The first manifestation was in the 10th grade. Judas did it. We were the cause of all of her ailments. She received them from us: tuberculosis, the infection in her head, and the sickness in her throat. We have continuously caused them to end. We did not bring her to suicide. To be among the damned, this was our most wicked intent, the worst for her. End quote. So I find this interesting, among other things that the demons do and say and talk about, It almost seems like they have a specific mission, a specific thing that they want everyone to believe, a narrative, if you will. And listen, I'm by no means a demon expert. I'm not Father Rodwick, of course. I don't know much about demons, and I've never spoken to any. But it seems like petty that these demons would be so concerned about like messing with Annelise's schoolwork, like damning her soul for all of eternity, making her do things that would like further the work of the devil. Okay, but what is it accomplishing when you just make her so distracted that she can't like pass an exam? Even though she was passing all of her exams, by the way, she was passing all of them. What's the goal here? What's the evil motive here? This is like Disney villain evil, right? Not like from the belly of the beast evil, but okay. Now, during one session, Anneleise grabbed Thea Hein by the throat, and she held on tight, and it took 3 men to pull Anneleise off the woman. Later, Thea Hein, clutching her pearls, said, quote, "She had the strength of a bear, yet she was a delicate thing. You can't imagine the strength she had. I thought at the time she would wring my neck. 5 men were there. The priest, Peter, my husband, Mr. Michel, Peter, and I believe Father Alt. I thought she was going to strangle me." End quote. So like everybody says this did happen, and it is a little startling because Anneleise was very weak at this time, right? She wasn't eating. She didn't have a lot of energy, which means her muscle mass was probably not the greatest, and she shouldn't have had this strength. But we do have instances of people displaying great feats of strength given, certain situations like mothers lifting cars off their children. And it's adrenaline, it's adrenaline. So could this have been the case with Anneleise? Yes. Could she have been inhabited by very strong demons who were just sick of listening to Thea Hein talk? Yeah, probably. Also, could the people around have been exaggerating in the aftermath because everybody was like getting in trouble, for doing these exorcisms? Also that maybe. I will say, although I do not speak German and I can't actually hear what's going on in the exorcism tapes, it's reported that during the exorcism, people are saying like, "Oh, she's so strong. Where is the strength coming from?" Which would mean this wasn't a narrative that was come up afterwards, like to protect them during trial, but something that they believed was happening during the exorcisms, which also doesn't make it an actual fact. It doesn't mean that she was actually displaying this incredible strength. It could mean that people were exaggerating or they saw what they wanted to see. On October 10th, the demons speaking through Anneleise claimed a new judgment day was coming. They said it would start in Europe and be worse than the last 2 put together. Now, I thought there was only one judgment day. That's what the Bible says, but once again, I guess the demons would know better than I would. I am just a fool for questioning them. And then on October 13th, which is the anniversary of the last apparition of the Blessed Virgin Mary in 1917 in Fatima, Portugal, the Blessed Virgin Mary herself began talking to Anneleise and instructing her to write down everything she heard and everything that happened to her during the exorcisms so that this could be relayed to Father Renz, who, according to Mary, was now Annelise's spiritual counselor. And Anneleise did begin to write everything down. Everything that the Blessed Virgin Mary said, things that the demons inside of her said, things that she was witnessing during her exorcisms. And she claims she received all of these messages from Mary through something called interlocution. Basically, this means she didn't hear or see anything. She just knew things. They were just like placed in her brain. It wasn't a thing where she saw Mary come down or heard Mary in her head. She just knew these things. Here's a quick explanation about Our Lady of Fatima, because it is important to understanding why this became a part of Annelise's narrative or the demon's narrative. So Our Lady of Fatima is the title given to the Blessed Virgin Mary in connection with the apparitions that she revealed of herself to 3 shepherd children in Portugal in the spring of 1916. Now, according to these 3 children, Francisco, Jacinta, and Lucia, Mary taught them how to pray on the rosary, and she told them to pray every day until the war was over, and this would be World War I. She appeared to the children 3 times that year, and in 1917, she requested that they return to see her in the same spot every month for 6 months, and allegedly on the 13th of each month between May and October of 1917, she appeared to the children again, and she gave them predictions or secrets. So Pope Benedict announced, quote, "The purpose of the vision is not to show a film of an irrevocably fixed future. Its meaning is exactly the opposite. It is meant to mobilize the forces of change in the right direction, end quote. So basically, this is important, right? Because the Pope was saying when you're getting a vision from Mary or Jesus or saints or whatever, it's not like a prophecy, like this is going to happen and you can't do anything about it. It's a warning. It's telling you what's going to happen and how you can fix it so that you may now mobilize your forces on earth to be an army for good. So basically, you as a human being are empowered to change the future. It is not set in stone. And this is very important because it did seem like the Blessed Virgin Mary was giving Anneleise these secrets about the future, hoping that she would warn others and also hoping that she would pick up the work of a woman named Barbara Weygand, who was a German visionary and mystic, and a woman who wrote many volumes that were considered prophetic by some Christians. And she lived right around in the same area. I believe she was, from the Klingenberg area. Barbara claimed to receive visions and messages from God and from Mary, and they told her things like they told her that Martin Luther had split the church in two, and this allowed Satan to use that crack to come into the world and begin to wreak havoc. So she was supposed to let people know so that they could, be on guard and hopefully repair what was damaged. Anneleise claimed that the Blessed Virgin Mary told her that she was intended to carry on Barbara's mission. Also, Mary said that Judgment Day was very close, so there wasn't a lot of time to turn things around. And, if Anneleise was able to get these messages out, she would be sainted. Both the Blessed Virgin Mary and the demons told Anneleise and everyone else that the demons would be gone by the end of October. They said that Judas was going to go first and Lucifer would be the last to vacate. And then the demons were like, yeah, we'll leave you alone, whatever. We're probably going to go to a neurological clinic where more demons like us are hidden in patients. And this sort of does give me an indication of how Anneleise looked at the doctors and the neurologists and the clinics. Maybe she felt that they were evil places filled with evil forces, and that everybody who was mentally unwell was actually fine except for a possession of demons. She definitely held resentment towards these doctors. She even held resentment towards the priests who didn't believe her early on. She says this during her exorcisms, that she is very full of negative feelings towards the doctors and the priests who didn't believe her and who didn't help her. But what's weird to me is the demons seem to be carrying the same message as the Blessed Virgin Mary. The demons were telling the priests and everyone, who was listening to these exorcisms, that religion was on a decline and everyone was corrupted and doomed unless they did this or that, Why would a demon who's claiming responsibility for the downfall of religion and a minimization in the belief of God tell the humans how to reverse course, Why would they be like, we caused this mess, we love it, but here's how you fix it. For instance, Father Renz asked if human souls could still be saved, and allegedly, Lucifer responded, quote, yes, also the hardened ones, but then penance has to be done with sacrifices and with perseverance. Specifically, you should adopt a way of living according to the Nazarene. Barbara Weygand preached this often. She did not do it willingly, yet she did it. There must be the will to continuously correct and better oneself, end quote. So Lucifer is like a motivational speaker right now. He's like, you got to be better, guys. Just live the straight and narrow, follow the life of the Nazarene. Why would Lucifer be telling people to live the way of the Nazarene? Why? So here's my theory, all right? Modernization of the Catholic Church has been a large and controversial issue for generations. Really, it still is. It was in the 60s. It was in the 20s. But I will say in the 60s, not only was religion and the church getting more modern, but, society in general was becoming more modern and, frankly, a bit less religious. Now, remember that Anneleise had hooked up with a group of girls who protested churches that were not doing their masses in Latin, and this could have been a real passion for Anneleise. She may have wanted to see a return to the old ways, the good ways, in her opinion, make Christianity great again. And she may have felt that it was her job to push that along to the point where she would be a messenger from the heavens and eventually even become a saint. Now, I've talked about this before in other videos, in other cases. I call it Harry Potter syndrome. A lot of people, especially young people, they like to fantasize that on the outside, they look normal, awkward even. No one appreciates them. But little does everyone know they are special. They are chosen, and they've been put here to be a part or even lead something very important. I mean, look at Harry Potter, right? He's freaking sleeping in a spider-infested cabinet under the stairs. It's like a closet under the stairs. He's wearing Dudley's hand-me-down clothes, which are too big for him and make him look like he's just swimming in these clothes, and everybody makes fun of him. He's got glasses, and they're always taped up because the Dursleys won't get him new glasses. He's like beat down by the Dursleys every single day. But he's also like the most important person in the whole wizarding world. So there's this whole other world, which is way more interesting and magical and colorful than the Muggle world. And Harry Potter is the guy over there. And he's just not getting the respect that he deserves because nobody knows, but they will know soon. And then everybody will be sorry that they treated him this way. It's a very common thing to see. Is this what's happening to Anneleise? Could this partially be what was affecting her, this magical thinking that, religion allowed to become fleshed out? She knew others had been sainted, others had been elevated in the church, like Padre Pio. Did she want that for herself? There were always high expectations put on Anneleise. She was the one who was going to save the family. She was going to be a teacher. She was going to get a good husband and be able to better the family and their reputation through what she was going to achieve. So did she feel that she had to be this magnificent person to continue getting that pride? So everyone was anticipating October 31st. Everyone got all excited when October 31st rolled around because this was supposed to be the end. The demons had promised they would go, and so had the Blessed Virgin Mary, and it seemed that they did leave Anneleise on that day, one by one. And Father Alt, who was present for this exorcism, because he would come here and there to different exorcisms, he was all excited, and he exclaimed, that everyone in the room felt this unspeakable and amazing relief. And Anneleise yelled out, "I am free now! I'm completely free!" And she was joyful, and she was smiling, and it looked like, once again, that cloud had left her face. But during the closing hymn, what was described as a horrific guttural scream ripped from Anneleise's throat, and the demon inside of her roared, "I have not gone out yet!" Because, demons are liars. And as it turned out, none of them had left. In a later session, Judas would say, quote, "We shall not go. Our business will take some time yet. We have deceived you. We will not get out. Today the dirty slut went to church. Stop with that. We shall not come out yet. We are going to torment the snot-nose for some time yet. She doesn't know anything and cannot take her examinations. Last Friday, we exhausted the snot-nose." End quote. So like I said, it doesn't make sense and it doesn't check out that these demons are so invested in just making her fail college. But the demons claimed that they were hanging out and torturing her some more so that Anneleise would not do well on her school exams. But despite this alleged and constant torment, Anneleise did take her exams. And she did do very well, which she then attributed to the Blessed Virgin Mary, who had told her, "You will pass all your tests, but you're going to be called upon to undergo tests of a different kind. I will give you my grace. You will be true unto death." So basically the demons are like, we're going to make you do really badly on the exams. And Mary's over here like, "No, I'm going to give you my grace. I'm going to bless you. And this will protect you from their interference so you can pass your exams." Once again, don't know why Anneleise passing her exams was important to the Blessed Virgin Mary. Because if Anneleise was there to just carry on the word that there was a judgment day coming and to help people get better, you would think that Mary would want Anneleise to focus on that and not worry about school, because who cares about school when you're getting messages from the heavens? But okay. So these exorcism sessions continued on throughout November and December, always several hours long and several times a week. But by January, the sessions became shorter because less was happening during them. And Father Renz wasn't able to get much in the way of answers or anything else from the demons. On February 1st, Judas informed everyone that Anneleise would not be eating the following week, saying, quote, We still want to torment her, and it is useful to fast. After all, she will not die of starvation. For the exams she can eat. But she knows really nothing. If she followed our advice, she would not have studied." End quote. So, okay, Anneleise is being instructed by the demons that she has to fast, that she can't eat. And Anneleise claimed, she wanted to eat, she was hungry. But when she raised food to her mouth, she wasn't able to put it in her mouth. She said there was a barrier there. But she can eat when she has an exam, right? And she needs the mental energy, even though the demons want her to fail her exams, but she can eat when she has an exam. She also claimed that the demons would not allow her to wear a coat when she went outside in the cold winter air or put blankets on at night, so she was freezing at night. By mid-February, though, the demons seemed to be going a little stir-crazy, and they started talking about how they wanted to get out of Anneleise badly. They wanted to get out of Anneleise, they wanted to get out of hell, and the demons were crying out, telling the priest to stop praying because they were being tortured, and they wanted to leave Annelise's body, but they no longer felt that they could. So what's going on here? Now, according to Friar Jose Fortia, who studied Annelise's condition, quote, "The body of the possessed becomes a jail for the evil spirits. Anneleise was like a city surrounded by her exorcists and those who helped them in this spiritual battle. Even though it was spiritual, it was a real battle. Anneleise was like a fortress where the demons remained on the defensive from their attackers, while at the same time the fortress was a jail for the occupants. On the one hand, they wanted to get out because they did not feel well inside, but on the other hand, they resisted because if they left the body, they would not likely return." End quote. So by March, Anneleise was really not doing well at all. She was living in Würzburg at the dorms when her friends found her curled up on the floor of her dorm room, too weak to even pick up a phone and call her parents to let them know that she would be coming home that weekend. Her boyfriend Peter took care of her. He called her parents, who came to visit with Anneleise's sister, Roswitha, and Roswitha actually ended up staying with Anneleise at school from the beginning of April on. And she did this to keep an eye on her and basically help her because Anneleise could not do anything for herself. She couldn't dress herself, she couldn't bathe herself, she couldn't feed herself. Father Renz also visited Anneleise, and he performed an exorcism prayer over her, which she did not respond to at all, besides to weakly tell him it made her feel better. Now, one day, Roswitha was in the kitchenette of the dorm when she ran into Anneleise's old roommate and friend, Ursula, who asked how Anneleise was doing. No one knew about the demonic possession that Anneleise was supposedly suffering from, besides Roswitha and Peter, and they'd also confided in another girl named Anna Lippert, who not only knew about the possession and the exorcisms, but helped Peter and Roswitha hide it from everyone at the school in Würzburg. But anyways, Ursula hadn't seen Anneleise for a while, and she knew that Anneleise was busy writing her senior thesis, and she was like, "Oh, hey, what are you doing here, Roswitha?" And Roswitha was like, "Oh, I'm taking care of Anneleise. She's been sick." And Ursula was like, "Oh, I have to check in on her. She's not feeling well. I'll just check in and give her a friendly word." So Ursula popped into Anneleise's room to check on her, and she was stunned by what she saw. She expected Anneleise to be sick in bed with the flu or something, maybe a fever, be a little sniffly, be tired. But she did not expect to see Anneleise laying in bed like a corpse, eyes open, unmoving, and not responsive. So Ursula asked Roswitha, "Have you guys called a doctor yet?" And Roswitha was like, "Yeah, if it's needed, I will call one. But these doctors have not been able to help her in the past, and Anneleise doesn't want us to call a doctor." So Ursula was worried, right? And Ursula actually spoke to Anneleise's old friend Marie, who then also stopped in to visit and see for herself the condition that Anneleise was in, and she was shocked as well. In fact, when she walked in, Roswitha was feeding Anneleise applesauce, and Anneleise wasn't even really eating the applesauce. She was just opening her mouth slightly to take a small amount in and then letting it dribble out again, kind of like a baby. And Maria was like, "Oh my God, holy shit, what's happening here?" So Maria got in front of Roswitha and directly in front of Anneleise and kind of began talking to her, getting louder and louder, saying, "Anneleise, is there anything I can do for you? Do you need anything? Is there somebody I can call?" She was almost worried that something bad was happening to Anneleise, and Roswitha was preventing Anneleise from getting any help, which she kind of was, right? Peter, Anna Lippert, and Roswitha were all kind of protecting Anneleise from getting any help from like a real medical professional. So Maria's standing in front of Anneleise and she's like yelling at her basically like, Anneleise, talk to me. Like, what can I do for you? And when Anneleise didn't respond to this, Roswitha got like annoyed and she led Maria away, basically saying like, oh, you're bothering Anneleise. You're disturbing her. You need to let her rest. Now, Maria did leave, but she came back a few days later. She found Anneleise in the exact same position in bed. So she went to Anna Lippert, who we already know is an undercover pro-exorcism agent, but Maria didn't know that. And Maria told Anna, listen, this is bad. Anneleise needs a doctor, and they're like preventing her from getting a doctor. And Anna was like, yes, you're absolutely right. Let me figure this out. And then Anna came back to Maria and she was like, oh, listen, a doctor's already been called and he's on his way. Now, Anna Lippert wasn't this like terrible person. She had just been told that the exorcism was a secret and it was intended to be kept a secret based on direct instructions from the Bishop of Würzburg, so she couldn't tell anyone. Now, what Anna Lippert did do, however, was go to the head of the college and ask for an extension on the third part of Annelise's senior thesis, which was due any day. But, Anneleise was laying in bed and not moving or talking, so she probably wasn't going to complete it on time. Now, the head of the college, he was like, why can't Anneleise do it? Like, what is she sick with? And Anna couldn't really tell this guy, like, why Anneleise was indisposed and why she was not able to actually do her thesis. So she was told that there would be no extension unless a doctor would testify that Anneleise was too sick to do her thesis. Had Anneleise seen a doctor yet, he wanted to know? Anna Lippert responded that she had not and left. But then, in the middle of the night on April 30th, Anneleise finally showed signs of life. But it was not a good time or a good way of showing it. She suddenly just began screaming loudly, repeatedly, over and over, and she wouldn't stop. So Roswitha ran to get Anna Lippert at 2 a.m., but even together, they could not get Anneleise to stop and be quiet, and Anna was worried that the screams would bring nosy girls from the dorm into Anneleise's room, and these girls would have questions, so she ran down to the payphone, she called Father Renz, and she told him to come immediately. Now, when Anna returned to Anneleise's room, the screams had brought other girls, and they were standing there, and they were like, what is going on with Anneleise? Why is she screaming? She won't stop. Like, you need to call a doctor, Anna. So Anna was like, okay, you're right. I'll go call a doctor. And she went back to the payphone, but she didn't call a doctor. She called Father Alt, who promised he would be there first thing in the morning. So when Father Alt arrived, he first spoke to the head of the college, Dr. Veth, and he told him that, Anneleise was demonically possessed and she'd been going through all of these exorcisms and basically she was going through a lot. So that's what was happening and, he shouldn't be concerned about it and don't worry. And Dr. Veth basically was like, okay, I'm going to kind of mind my own business and stay out of this because he heard that the Bishop of Würzburg had given permission and technically the bishop was the direct superior of Dr. Veth because this is a religious college. So it was Father Alt's idea to take Anneleise back with him to the Ettelben parish where he felt he could keep an eye on her, he could perform an exorcism if she needed it, and she could still continue to work on her thesis because it was close enough to the school if she needed to be on campus for some reason, and he would sort of be there as like her priest EpiPen. If she got stung by a bee or an exorcism popped up, he would just come in and fix it so she could continue focusing on her schoolwork. But this arrangement was short-lived. On the way to the parish, Anneleise dreamily told Peter and Father Alt that she'd been informed by Mary and the demons that this was all going to end soon. She would be free in July. In July, everything would be over. And just for the record, Anneleise would die on July 1st, 1976. When they arrived at the parish in Ettelben, the first thing that Anneleise wanted to do was walk over and see the newly remodeled church. But as soon as she walked inside this church, according to Peter, her face hardened into a sinister mask, and she told Peter that she had to stay there in the church and pray until evening mass, which wasn't until 3 hours later. So Peter was like, you can't stay here for 3 hours. Like, we've got to get Father Alt. It's happening to you again. He's got to give you a blessing. So he tried to lift her. but Peter said that Anneleise was too heavy to lift. It was like as if something was weighing her down. So he went and got Father Alt, and together they were able to remove her from the church after Father Alt had prayed over her. But when she got to her room in the parish house, Anneleise got into her bed and then just laid there for several days, not moving and refusing to eat. She also then insisted on laying on the floor instead of in the bed, and her body stiffened and contorted in pain, causing her to scream and grind her teeth for hours. Only when Father Alt prayed over her did Annelise's torture seem to lessen. On May 9th, 1996, Anna and Joseph brought their daughter home to Klingenberg, but she did not improve. In fact, things were worse than ever. Anneleise had to be constantly restrained. If she wasn't, she would hit herself or slam her head into the floor, into walls, into hard objects. She would rub her face violently into the wall or the floor. She would bite herself. And her mother, Anna, said it was as if Anneleise was being constantly pushed to the ground by some unseen force. And every time she tried to get back up, she was shoved down again. And this went on for hours. Even though she was clearly sick, clearly ill, Anneleise continued to fight against those who were restraining her with an insane amount of strength, and no doctor was called. And then the exorcisms resumed the day after she returned home. So at one point during the month of May, the college called Anneleise's parents and informed them that she'd missed the deadline to turn in the third part of her senior thesis, and she was scheduled to begin the student teaching position the following September. She wasn't going to be able to do that if she didn't have her senior thesis turned in and graded, and they would only grant an extension if she sent in a doctor's note. So her father, Joseph, called Dr. Keller, the family doctor, but Dr. Keller said he would only write a note if he was able to see Anneleise in person. And so they agreed to a house call, but Joseph called back and canceled when Father Alt was able to get a note from a doctor he knew in Edelben, and the extension was granted. Now, when Anneleise found out that her senior thesis needed to be turned in and she had gotten an extension, she immediately became better out of nowhere, and her symptoms disappeared, or, the demons left her alone, or Mary came in and gave her protection for almost 6 hours, long enough for her to draft an entire outline with all the details and ideas that she needed to be put in there, which Peter and Roswitha were able to then use to type up her senior thesis and hand it in. On June 2nd, 1976, Father Renz wrote to Bishop Stengel, saying, quote, "Concerning Anneleise, she has had to suffer outrageously during the past few days, and also her family who are close to despairing. Anneleise injured herself so seriously that her left cheek is swollen badly, and both her eyes look as if she had been worked over with a fist, with blue and red and black discoloration." End quote. And there actually was a medical doctor who did get to see Anneleise in person during this time when she would have been in bad shape, as Father Renz described in his June 2nd letter. And this was a Dr. Richard Roth, a friend of Father Alt's. Father Alt had asked Dr. Roth to be present during one of the exorcisms in early June because Anneleise had become so violent yet frail. So he was concerned she was going to break one of her own bones. And also, Father Alt wanted Dr. Roth to sort of be on call in case something bad did happen and he had to come and make her better or fix her. But when Dr. Roth heard about Anneleise, he was more interested in witnessing one of her exorcisms because he told Father Alt that hearing about Anneleise had brought him back to God and gotten him praying again. So Father Alt asked Dr. Roth to bring something along during this exorcism, something that could calm Anneleise during the session if she got especially excited. And he said that he saw Dr. Roth grab some needles and vials from his office before they headed out to meet the Michels at their home. And during the trial, Dr. Richard Roth was asked, "Why didn't you step in? You would have been there when Anneleise looked very sick, all black and blue. You would have been able to see what bad shape she was in. You should have done something for her as a medical doctor." But Dr. Roth claimed he'd only stayed for about 5 or 10 minutes and he'd only seen Anneleise from the back. However, before the trial, before he got his story straight, when he was questioned as a witness in December of 1976, Dr. Roth said this, quote, "We went upstairs in the Michel house. Anneleise Michel stood in the hallway. She was dressed. On both sides, she was held by 2 younger women because she kept wanting to hit her head against the door. I do not remember if she gave off any sounds. In the hall, it was very dark. I could not see her face carried any external injuries." End quote. Bullshit. I call bullshit on Dr. Roth. And yeah. So those who were present claimed that Dr. Roth at the time did see how Anneleise was and witnessed her exorcism, and it was there for more than 5 or 10 minutes. And he said to them, quote, "There is no injection against the devil," end quote. So he brought stuff to calm her, probably sedatives. And he was like, "Oh, I'm not even going to bother. I don't even want to get near her. The devil's inside of her." And people who were there said that when he saw Anneleise, he cried out, "The stigmata, she has the stigmata." And he informed Annelise's parents that his knowledge of medicine would not help Anneleise with what she was suffering from. Of course, Dr. Roth denied ever saying any of this, because remember, he's just there for 5 minutes in the dark hallway and then he leaves. Because why would you do that? If you traveled all that way to see an exorcism, why would you just go in for 5 minutes and be like, it is dark in this hallway? They weren't even in the hallway, by the way. They were in the room, but okay. "It is dark in this hallway. I think I will leave now. My job here is done." The last time Father Alt saw Anneleise Michel alive was on June 8th, 1976, at which point her face was sunken in, her cheekbones were sticking out, and there were deep, dark circles under and around her eyes. Father Alt asked her parents if they had tried to get Anneleise to eat, and they said, sadly, they had. They'd tried everything, but every time they put food in her mouth, she spit it back out at them. At this time, Anneleise had a cut over her eye, and her eye was swollen shut because she had thrown herself through a glass door, and her teeth were chipped because she had started to chew a hole through the wall. On June 27th, Anneleise had a fever of 103, and her father called Father Alt, who told Joseph to call a doctor. June 30th was the last exorcism session. Annelise's fever was back, and the last words she spoke to Father Renz were, "Please, absolution." When everyone had left the room past midnight on July 1st, Anneleise reached out to her mother, Anna, and said, "Please, Mama, stay with me. I'm afraid." And Anna did sit next to Anneleise in bed until her daughter fell asleep. And around 7 in the morning, Joseph entered Annelise's room quietly to check on her, and he was pleased to see that she was sleeping peacefully for the first time in a long time. So maybe the messages Anneleise had gotten from the other side were true. It was July 1st. Maybe it was finally over. Maybe the demons had left her. This was hopeful for Joseph and Anna, but only for a short time, because it was over. But it was over because Anneleise Michel was no longer alive. Her autopsy showed that the cause of death had been starvation, possibly complicated by physical exertion. But the poor girl was not allowed to rest in peace yet. We already know that Annelise's parents, Father Alt and Father Renz, were charged with negligent homicide. There had also been charges initially against Bishop Stangl and Father Rodwick, but those were dropped. And even with a trial coming up, the madness continued when a Carmelite nun claimed that she was getting messages from the heavens about Anneleise. And this nun said that Anneleise had been sainted and the body needed to be exhumed. Because if Annelise's body was not decomposed, she'd been telling the truth. She had been sainted and she had died for others' sins. Therefore, she would remain as she was in life forever, like Father Pio, who, honestly, if you see pictures of his body now, he hasn't decomposed. It's weird. Well, it's actually not weird, right? Because if you look at pictures of Padre Pio, he's laying in a glass coffin sort of, so you can see him, and it's said that when people are sainted, they do not decompose. So you look at him and you're like, oh, holy shit, he did not decompose. This is crazy. And you're like, what could cause this? And then you find out that actually he had been, decomposed. He was exhumed after 40 years, and they actually reconstructed a lifelike silicone mask, kind of like what's used in wax museums, and put it on him so that when people view him, that's what they're seeing, which is the real crazy thing. That's crazy. So basically they said, if Anneleise is sainted and we exhume her, you will find that she has not decomposed. So the exhumation did happen on February 25th, 1978, and Annelise's body was moved to the morgue where she would be inspected. Now, apparently, the Michels and Father Renz have been told that they could view the body to see for themselves, But they claimed they were denied this opportunity, and they were simply told that Anneleise had decomposed as she normally would have in the amount of time she had been dead. But the fact that they were not able to see this with their own eyes caused a lot of rumors, a lot of controversy, and a lot of conspiracy, which still exists today. As of now, Anneleise is buried next to her family home. She's laying beside her sister Martha in a small graveyard, and sometimes pilgrims visit her grave because they believe that she was a saint, that she was a martyr, tasked with, saving them. And so they go to her gravesite and they pray to her. The trial itself began on March 30th, 1978, and Joseph Michel requested that a prayer be said before the proceedings officially started, since this was, after all, a case of possession. Oh, even in court, man, you're there because of a certain reason and you just need to chill. All right, you just need to be quiet, keep your head down and let it happen because this is ridiculous. And a judge was like, I'm sorry, this is a court of law, not a church, so we're not going to do that. And that's kind of what got you in this mess to begin with. I don't know if I agree with that, but whatever. It is a little much, Joseph. So I'll just give you the highlight reel of the trial. Roswitha, Annelise's sister, she got on the stand, and when she was asked why a doctor hadn't been called, she said, "Why would you call a doctor? Possession isn't like a broken leg, Both Peter and Thea Hine testified that Anneleise had made her stance clear. She wanted to see no more doctors, and she feared that if she did go to see doctors, they were going to send her away to the state mental asylum, which, let's be honest, they probably would have, since she'd already seen so many doctors who just couldn't figure out what was wrong with her. They probably would have at that point had her put in a mental institution. So Professor Hans Satt, a psychiatrist at the neurological clinic in Würzburg, also testified, and he said that Anneleise had epilepsy, but he also believed she had suffered from delusional ideas about being sinful, which he claimed was common in religious people who were also suffering from depression. He said that the medication she had been on was suppressing the seizures from 1969 on, but the epilepsy had evolved into a psychosis, which went untreated and then spiraled into a mental illness when those around her went along with the things she was saying. So if Anneleise had said, I'm possessed, and the people around her had said, no, you're not, we have to get you some help, maybe it wouldn't have gone so far. But because everyone seemed to believe her and were on board with the idea, it only solidified to her that she was experiencing demonic possession, that her body was inhabited by these demons. So Professor Satt claimed that if Anneleise had been his patient, he would have had her tranquilized, force-fed, and given electroshock therapy, which is probably, like I said, what would have happened. Would that have been better for her? Would it have saved her? Would it have fixed whatever was plaguing her? Probably not, right? It would have been a temporary solution to keep her alive, and then hopefully they would have gotten her the help that she needed, but considering that they had not up to that point, they probably wouldn't have. She probably just would have lived out the rest of her life in a mental institution. So two psychiatrists, Dr. Alfred Lungerhausen and Dr. Klaus Kohler, examined Father Alt and Father Renz. With Father Renz, they said they found his answers to be rambling, but also precise and definite. And they found his intellectual abilities to be completely normal, which made them question why he hadn't been able to critically evaluate a case of demonic possession. In Father Renz, they said there were no signs of depression, psychosis, or schizophrenia, but in Father Alt, they did find some signs of schizophrenia. So the verdict ended up being that all four were found guilty of negligent homicide, but the judge did say that he believed there was no way any of them could have known that Annelise's epilepsy had evolved into a psychosis. The exorcisms aggravated her condition mentally, which caused her to hurt herself physically, and no one stopped her. So Anneleise should have been committed, she should have been force-fed, and been seen by a mental health professional, even if it was not what she wanted, which was what her parents, Peter and her sister, claimed. That they had said, let's bring you to a doctor, let's bring you to see a therapist, etc. And she was like, absolutely not. The judge was saying, you should have forced her. Father Alt, Father Renz, Anna Michel, and Joseph Michel were found guilty and sentenced to 6 months in prison, a sentence that was suspended in favor of 3 years of probation, so no one saw the inside of a jail cell, but both priests were ordered to pay some hefty fines. And listen, we're at the end of this now. There's dozens of things that could have been wrong with Anneleise, medically, psychologically. There's very little doubt that she was epileptic, and there could have been several other factors contributing to her unique set of symptoms. So we can't just point to one thing like epilepsy and say that was the cause. I think it was a perfect storm of conditions, both mental and physical. But I'll just talk about a few of the interesting theories that I came up with after reading your comments and doing some research of my own. And there is this condition called anti-NMDA receptor encephalitis. It's a very rare autoimmune disease, and because it's so rare, it's often misdiagnosed even today. Anti-NMDA receptor encephalitis occurs when antibodies in the body attack NMDA receptors in the brain, and these receptors are very important because they're responsible for judgment, perception of reality, human interaction, the formation and retrieval of memory, and the control of activities like breathing and swallowing. So a person suffering from this may experience a ton of different symptoms, including terrible headaches, paranoia, delusions, and when they go to doctors, they're usually diagnosed with mental health conditions. Now, this condition affects men and women and women of all ages, from like babies to, senior citizens. But more commonly than not, it affects women of childbearing age. And this condition threw a young college student named Cassidy Anderson into chaos in the winter of 2017 when she was a senior at William Carey University. She began to suffer from severe headaches, memory issues, and visual hallucinations that started in the form of flashes of light. Quote, her symptoms became significantly worse. Anderson says she would space out nearly 60 times a day, claiming she felt as though she were floating. However, she kept things to herself. I didn't want anyone to freak out, Anderson said. I just dealt with it for a while. I didn't even tell my mom. The thing about this was that I could pull myself together for about 20 minutes a day, just 20 minutes. I didn't want people to think something was wrong with me. By March of 2019, she could not keep her secret any longer and finally told her mother. By May, she had digressed significantly. She started experiencing involuntary eye and arm movements in addition to her other symptoms. All the while, her local doctors were unable to pinpoint what exactly the cause was. I felt like I was going to die if I didn't get any help, she said. I couldn't breathe, and my doctors thought I had severe anxiety. I felt like a stranger in my own body. End quote. So during one of her microbiology classes one day, Cassidy couldn't even remember her own name, and it was then that she was referred to Dr. Michael Vafidis, who had recently seen a film called Brain on Fire, in which this condition had been discussed. Vafidis said, quote, the way she described certain things made me think she had something like that, even though the initial testing was negative. She said she was feeling out of touch and having these weird episodes, but the way she described them didn't sound like seizures to me. She had headaches that couldn't be accounted for by anything on the imaging or the spinal tap. End quote. This disease wasn't even discovered until 2007, and even after, it was and still is considered to be obscure enough where many doctors still may not think about it when faced with a patient like Cassidy Anderson or like Anneleise Michel, but it is believed that the condition may be responsible for many infamous cases of possession. In 2008, a 12-year-old girl in Canada began exhibiting flu-like symptoms accompanied by memory loss. Blood tests and doctor's visits gave no answers, but within days of being released from the hospital, the girl began having delusions and talking about herself in the third person. One day, she unbuckled her seatbelt, jumped out of her parents' car, and began running after a city bus. And when they didn't let her get on, she became wild and violent, kicking and swearing and cursing God. If it had been the 1870s, or even the 1970s, people may have thought that this young girl was possessed. I mean, even people at that point in 2008 thought she was, and then they brought her to the doctor and they were like, no, she has this horrible condition. So Anneleise could have been suffering from something like that. She could have been suffering from any autoimmune disease like Hashimoto's or Graves'. We know she was sick a lot in her childhood and youth, so that would all make sense. And as somebody who is immunocompromised, as somebody who does have a few different autoimmune diseases, I understand that you will look anywhere for a cure. You'll look anywhere for relief. You'll try anything. And all of these health problems could have led to mental health issues. They do, when you have an autoimmune disease or a chronic illness, it does lead to a very negative state of mind. And, maybe Anneleise had a desire to make this tragedy and these horrible things that were happening to her more meaningful by putting some religious meaning behind them. Now, some suggested that Anneleise suffered from sleep paralysis, which does make sense, but she only mentioned having those issues at night a few times. And because sleep paralysis is also known as the night hag, which is the name for a creature in the folklore of different cultures that's been used to explain sleep paralysis before people understood what it was, it does make a lot of sense that she was maybe experiencing this in the beginning, because they say it feels like someone is standing on your chest, or there's some like supernatural or malevolent force oppressing you, pushing you down. I mean, it could be a plethora of these conditions that came together to torture this girl, and whether you think it was right or wrong, it's understandable why the people around her were convinced that she was under the control of something evil, something that wanted to hurt her. And they only wanted to help her. They wanted to save her from this. I also read this article. Well, it wasn't an article. It was like a paper written by some academic person. And it posited the idea that all schizophrenics could be possessed by demons, with the author of this study, which was titled Schizophrenia or Possession, inviting us to consider the possibility of a demonic world, a parallel world occupied by intelligent and unseen creatures who have the ability to possess and take over the minds and bodies of humans. The author says, quote, "There exist similarities between the clinical symptoms of schizophrenia and demonic possession. Common symptoms in schizophrenia and demonic possession, such as hallucinations and delusions, may be a result of the fact that demons in the vicinity of the brain may form the symptoms of schizophrenia. Delusions of schizophrenia, such as my feelings and movements are controlled by others in a certain way, and they put thoughts in my head that are not mine, may be thoughts that stem from the effects of demons on the brain," end quote. I mean, listen, I like reading all different viewpoints of everything. This guy is saying like, well, symptoms of, schizophrenia and symptoms of demonic possession are kind of similar. Yeah, I agree. But could it be that all the people you thought were demonically possessed just had schizophrenia? And that's what you're kind of like trying to get at? But am I going to say that there's not some like alternate reality where, there's like beings that we don't understand or that we can't see? No, I'm not going to say that. I don't know. I don't know if there is or not. It's very possible. I like to think and explore that idea that there is, and there is some scientific evidence that there might be. So I'm not going to write that off. No, maybe they aren't demons from hell in the religious sense. Maybe you don't even have to be religious or believe in God to believe in demons. I don't know. It's a lot, but I mean, that's where we are. We kind of went over all of the things, and even during these last 3 parts, I would stop and say, maybe it's this, maybe it's this. But at the end of the day, we don't know what it is. I think it's important to understand that Anneleise, made it seem like she wanted this. And a lot of people say, well, she wasn't in her right mind, which I completely agree with. And other people say like, oh, this poor little girl. She wasn't a little girl. She was 23. She was still going to school. She was still doing well in her classes. She was still able to pull it together enough to, get certain things done. It does seem like she was able to pick and choose when her symptoms came, and it does seem like she sort of tailored her demons and what they would say based on what people had said previously. But does that mean that she was doing it maliciously to like lie or to get attention? No, I think she truly believed it. I think she was under some very strong mental stress. And I do think that the people around her buying into it did not help that. It just gave her the feeling that she was absolutely correct. But I'm also not saying that her parents didn't do a lot before kind of buying into the whole demonic possession thing to help her. They brought her to doctors. They brought her to neurologists. She went to like mental health professionals. It wasn't as if she just started acting weird and her parents were like, call the priest, get the exorcism started now. And a lot of people think that's what happened. And I'm not saying that what they did was right, and I'm not saying that it's what I would have done, but I am saying that I think what they thought they were doing was right. And there needs to be a little context for that. There needs to be a little understanding for that, because they wouldn't want to hurt their daughter. They wanted to help her, and they thought they were. Anneleise's case was made into a movie, The Exorcism of Emily Rose, which came out, I don't remember. It's a long time ago now, maybe like 20 years or like 18 years ago this movie came out. And I think the reason that her case and what happened to her life was made into a movie was because it's not cut and dry. It's not black and white. Because even when you're watching the movie, you're like, hold on, is Emily Rose possessed by demons or is she sick? Like, I don't know. And it's kind of really what makes it such a compelling story, because whether you're religious or whether you're not, you still end up leaving it not knowing what you believe or what really happened to Anneleise Michel or Emily Rose in the case of the movie. You just can't say for sure. You think you know, and you think logically you know, but at the end of the day, a lot of things happened that make you wonder, like the whole holy water thing and everybody around her experiencing these symptoms. Were they all under the same delusion? Were they all lying? Was this a grand plan? Who knows? But it happened. And everything I've told you today is absolutely the truth. You know, I haven't made things up or exaggerated. Other people may have exaggerated, but I haven't. So I really appreciate you guys being here with me through this series. Make sure you let me know what you think about it at the end of the day in the comments. I would be really interested in getting some more of your feedback, because you guys have had very interesting feedback through these last 2 parts. Also, make sure to follow me on social media, Instagram and Twitter. Links are in the description box. A link in the description box will also lead you to my podcast, Crime Weekly, which we have in audio form anywhere you get your podcast or in video form on YouTube. And you can find the link to my coffee company, Criminal Coffee Company, the best coffee ever. If you need to stay awake throughout a very extended exorcism, Criminal Coffee is the way to go. Thank you all so much for sharing this Harloween with me. It's been an unexpected one, but a great one. I appreciate you so much. I will see you very, very soon. But until then, stay kind, stay beautiful, stay spooky, stay safe.